Hey guys, and welcome back. So today we're going to talk about web scenarios, so web monitoring within the Zabbix, and I do have a Zabbix frontend open on my screen, which is Zabbix 5.2 running from the containers on my Oracle Linux at the moment 7 virtual machine, but that really doesn't matter for this configuration. And we're going to talk about functionality and how the stuff actually works, how can you monitor your web pages, and how you can create a triggers on them. So first of all, like monitoring, nothing unusual to the Zabbix, but normally when we talk about monitoring, we talk about items, right? Some sort of the items that I already have here on my default Zabbix server host, so we can collect available like memory, CPU load, state of some services, or whatever else. But web monitoring is something absolutely different, and it's not even about the items. Well, kind of it is, but not really. We're going to talk about it shortly. So for the testing sake, I will just create a new host and call it, let's say, web monitoring example. The host must be in at least one host group. That is a requirement by the Zabbix, and that's basically it. We don't actually need an interface. I will add this. And why we don't need an interface? Because interface is working only for the Zabbix agent, SNMP, JMX for the Java, and IPMI, but web scenario is none of the mentioned. So web scenario is checked only by Zabbix server, or if you have a proxy, then it can be also done by the Zabbix proxy. And in this case, in the configuration of your host, you must specify that this host is monitored by proxy and then choose one. So agent is not involved by the server or by the proxy only. So if you want to, let's say, monitor your web page from all the different locations, like different cities, different countries, you will have to work around with some light proxies that will be doing this. So when we have a host up and running, we need to go not to the items, but to the web scenarios, and this is the place where we actually create them. And yeah, so just straight ahead, create a new web scenario, and then we have I would say that actually quite a lot of parameters that we can play around with based on like, do we need them at all for the particular case. So first of all, the scenario. So the scenario name, let's say what we are trying to monitor as example. So let's say I want to monitor Zabbix documentation and applications. So this is optional, just like it is for the items, just for the logical grouping. Update interval, how often do I want to recheck this, my web page, maybe the Zabbix documentation or whatever else. So for the testing purposes, let's make it 10 seconds. Then the number of attempts, because things happen, right? Especially with the web pages, there might be some HTTP error codes, it might be overloaded, or there might be some timeouts reached. So we basically have an option to specify, let's say, instead of just one attempt to collect data from this web page, we can try 10 times. So if the first time we get some sort of HTTP error code, we'll try again, and only if we will fail 10 times in a row, then we will receive that the step scenario actually failed and we did not receive any monitoring data. Then agents. So how do we actually plan to collect this data? And still all of the monitoring, all of the web scenario is achieved just like I mentioned, by the Zabbix server or the proxy and by the curl utility in your CLI. So this one. And nothing like no deeper science. There is no deep Zabbix, let's say, internal functionality to collect some sort of web page information. All of the stuff that we will be configuring here in the web frontend is actually in the end executed with the curl utility. So if something is not working as you would expect it to work, I would actually recommend you to check like what is your current curl utility version. Maybe there are some known bugs to it, and maybe you can just simply upgrade it to the latest version, and it might solve your problem. So what we can is we can pretend as some sort of the browser. So we can pretend as a Firefox or Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, or just a regular Zabbix agent. HTTP proxy, well, that's again up to you. If you have and if you need to use HTTP proxy for this step, you can set it up. Maybe you have a global HTTP proxy on your server as a Linux machine, so up to you. Variables and headers, we're going to talk about them shortly. So basically these are used if you want to achieve some deeper logic. Like the simple web scenario would be if you want to simply check the page, is it up, running, yes, check the download speed, check the response code, done. More complex scenario is that, let's say, if that is some sort of the forum, we want to log in, we want to post some sort of the comment, we want to verify that this comment was actually published, and then we will end our scenario. So that will follow up later. Then we actually, after this, when we filled in the first page of the configuration, we actually need to move to the steps, and this is the place where we are configuring all of the stuff that we actually want to check in our web page. So there could be multiple steps, and let's make it first whatever index page, and then a URL. So we need to type in what do we actually will be checking. So I will check Zabbix documentation page, documentation. Let's create it 5.0 like this. So 5.0 manual. Copy paste URL, query fields, post type. Do we want to post the form data or the raw data? What kind of post fields with the values do we want to add? Variables and headers. Again, this might be sound complicated, but this is used only if you want to have that extra mile and actually do some logging into the web page, posting some sort of the content, and then check what is happening. So for a simple monitoring of the web page, we can simply skip all of this and then follow redirects or not. So this is just a checkbox, and that absolutely depends from the configuration of your web page. So whether this URL is opening the web page right away, or whether there is some sort of the redirect. So then you can just check the checkbox. Retrieve mode, do you want to get full body or just the headers of the response, or both the body and the headers? So the same configuration that you can also apply in the curl request in your CLI when you're checking some sort of the web page. The timeout, well, pretty simple, right? So what will be the timeout for this check? Then the required string allows us to check some sort of the string in the web page that we're trying to open. So we can check for the welcome, right? So this page contains the welcome string, and so we can check for it, make sure that there are no extra spaces, and the required status code. So this would be the HTTP code, and if everything is correct successfully, we can open the page. Then we can expect the code 200. So click add, and then we can check another page. Let's make it second step. URL, let's make it introduction, like this. Just change the URL, and then we'll check for some other string called introduction. Why old? Not old, just introduction, and status code 200. Click add, and the third one, no, let's make them just like 2. So I've added a scenario, and I will reload the config cache of the Zabbix server just to make it faster. So config cache will load. Right, it's Docker, Docker PS. So docker exec -it, then the container is this one, and Zabbix server -r config cache reload. There we go, command sent successfully, and all the monitor data from our web scenarios is available in monitoring hosts. Then search for our monitoring example. Then we can see the place where we can enter called web, and we see that second step failed. Required pattern introduction was not found on this page, which is I'm not sure why. Let's try to debug this. So configuration hosts, the web scenario, Zabbix documentation, sorry, web monitoring. Where is the configuration? Configuration hosts and web monitoring web. Click here on the steps, second step. So we have a URL which we can open, and we have a string that we want to search. And there are multiple places where it is matching. So let's try it like this and execute it in curl and grep introduction. Nothing. And if we would check for lowercase introduction, yeah, so the problem is that we are searching for uppercase introduction, but on the page that we are opening, there is only a lowercase. So I will update the scenario and again reload the config cache to make it faster. Then the question is like, why in the page we see uppercase introduction while in the curl response there is only a lowercase? So I believe that this part of the page, which is doc-wiki, I believe documentation of the Zabbix, has actually probably different URL. I'm not sure, but the long story short is, if we would check in the curl, there was nothing with an uppercase introduction, only lowercase. So now if we would again check monitoring hosts and web, we see that status is okay. So both steps executed successfully, and we can open it, and what we will see is our both steps: first index page with the response time, speed, and the response code, plus the second step: speed, response time, response code, and the graphs automatically generated that we can see. And let's say find out some moments, some days when our web page was slower than we expected, and then try to correlate it with some sort of the problems that might be happening. Important things that you need to know is there are a couple of well, basically two most important things about a web scenario monitoring. I told that it is possible to log in, authenticate to some sort of the web pages, but you need to remember that web scenarios within the Zabbix did not support JavaScript. So as long as your login form is using the JavaScript, most likely you will not be able to use any tips and tricks or whatever else to successfully log in using the web scenario. And the second thing, there is no if else. So if let's say you can create multiple steps, there are no limitation, there's could be like 5, 10, 20, but if the first step fails, that's it, all scenario fails, and there is no way how you can actually do the if else scenario. Then getting back to authentication and actually posting something, I would recommend you to check the Zabbix documentation, which we have also open, and there is a section number 9 called web monitoring, which actually has a real-life scenario, and this real-life scenario is about a Zabbix front-end monitoring, which is also using just the facts that we talked about in the beginning, the variables, remember, the password and a user that we are actually using to log in to our Zabbix front end. So sign out, so this, which is a default capital admin and lowercase Zabbix, and then in other steps, step 2, so open the index page. Step 3, actually log in. So we are signing in, and we also need to provide a session ID variable, which in this example was extracted. Actually, it's worth checking because I remember previously it was extracted from the index page in the source. Sorry, not this, in the page source, but right now this page is changed, and I have a wild guess that it's not possible anymore to grab a session ID from the login form index page of the Zabbix frontend. So this tutorial might be not, let's say, up to date to the current 5.2 release, but you can always pick up the session ID from your database or from the API calls by using the user.login method, and in the response you will get the actual token, the actual session ID. So in this way we're using the user password, we're signing in using the session ID, and then we can check these multiple scenarios. Like here we would check for the administration section, which is available of course only after we log in to our Zabbix frontend. And then the last part about the triggers and items. So, okay, we have a web scenario and we have it on our independent host. There is one web scenario. I want to create a triggers, but we know that triggers are working with the items, right? And if we would check for the item section, there are no items. So actually there are items, and if you will again open the same documentation about the web monitoring items, as soon as scenario is created, Zabbix automatically adds the following items for monitoring, linking them to the selected application. So we have items for a download speed for any particular scenario that we may have, failed step of scenario, and again the number of the scenario, and the last message of the scenario. So these items are created, and despite the fact that we don't see them in the front end, they are there. And if we would check the API method, we can actually try to quickly find it. So API method reference item dot get web items. See, it is a flag, include web items in the results. So also by default in your item get API method, you will not get web items created by the web scenarios. But if you will check this as true, you will actually see those web items created. But the story is not about that. So as long as we know that those items are here, we can create the triggers for them. So how to do that? Just simply create a trigger, just like we're doing that normally. And I believe there will be nothing. No, there actually even are possible things that we can check. So calling the name, let's say download speed is too high, right? And event name, whatever, operational data, whatever, it will be high. And expression, where we need to write the syntax, including the item name, item key, sorry, but we don't know it and we don't see it here, but we can click on the add button and in the select, so we can see all of those web items that are generated automatically. And for the download speed of for scenario Zabbix documentation, download speed for the first step that we created in our scenario, or download speed for the second step that we again created in our web scenario. So let's make the first one, and yeah, whatever. So web monitoring example, if the last value will be higher, let's say 5 EPS, then it will be a high severity problem. So I will click add, and we can again reload config cache. And I'm actually not sure what are the values of this. So Zabbix documentation and the download speed are definitely higher than just 5. So in a second we should have the download speed is too high on. We could add a host.host macro. So I guess that's it about the web scenarios. It really depends, the complexity of the configuration depends on what do you want to achieve. Is it enough for you to just simply check to simply check the download speed and HTTP status code and some strings of the web page, or do you want to log in, post something, and then check it? And if you have to do that login part, it also really differs from which page you are actually trying to monitor. Is it just a simple, let's say, PHP BP forum page, or is it some complex service provider where you have to make the authentication using many parameters? So those parts gonna differ, and I hope that this, let's say, generic introduction will help you further on to configure all of this stuff. So for now, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to click that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll definitely see you in the next video. So thank you, have a good one, and goodbye.